All right, so for our first lesson about trig ratios, let's talk about what's going on with this stuff. So imagine we have three machines, okay? Number one, number two, number three. These three machines all work the same way. If you enter a number, okay, they're like calculators. If you enter a number, it gives you a different number. It uses them to calculate something. So now they all work related to triangles, specifically right angle triangles. What happens is, if you put in two of the sides, the machine will do calculations and give you the angle that's related to it. They all work the same way. They all get two sides. The only difference is it takes different sides for each, because triangles have three sides. So this first machine, you have to give it the opposite and the hypotenuse. This one you have to give it the adjacent and the hypotenuse. This one you have to give it the opposite and the adjacent. And they all give you an angle, okay? Depending on which side you gave. These machines are called sine, cosine, and tangent. Now, each of these is basically a mathematical formula. It's something super complicated. We're not going to go into what it is, but basically it's your calculator or the machine does the calculation for you. All you have to give it is these numbers, and it'll do math to turn it into the other number, okay? So now that you know you have access to these machines, we need to figure out how can we give it the right ones? What's opposite? What's hypotenuse? What's adjacent? If we take a right angle triangle, any right angle triangle, we need to take an angle we're dealing with. Let's say it's this one, x. Opposite is the angle that's all the way across from that angle. It's the easiest to label, opposite. I usually label it first. The next one you should label is the hypotenuse. You probably remember this from last year. You go from the right angle and you go across. That's the hypotenuse. Okay? It's the longest side, but it's also the one that's across from the 90. The last one's adjacent. It's the one that's directly beside the angle you're looking at. Now, be careful, because the hypotenuse is also adjacent, but it's not called adjacent because it's called hypotenuse. So that's why I usually tell students they should label hypotenuse either first or second so they don't mess it up and accidentally call it adjacent. Okay? Now, the angle we're working with is really important. So let's do the exact same triangle we just had, but instead we'll do this angle. If this was the angle we're looking at instead of this one in the corner, that means this is going to be opposite, this is going to be adjacent, this is still hypotenuse. Now you'll notice the adjacent and opposite change depending which angle you're doing. You're never going to do the right angle because it's 90, you know what the angle is, it's not worth calculating. These angles you are going to calculate because they can change. So if we took this angle, this triangle, and that was the angle we're doing, think for a sec, what would each side be labeled? So this is opposite, this is adjacent, this is hypotenuse. Now, we need to set up our ratios. So these machines, okay, we need to be able to write and explain what they're doing. So the way we write it is as an equation. So we're going to say, all right, if we take sine of x, or our angle or whatever, it will give us opposite over hypotenuse. Same thing as if we put this in first and it gave us that. Okay? That's how we write in math what's happening in our calculator. If we were doing the second one, it would be the same, except it's cos for cosine, x equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And the third one is called tangent, x equals opposite over adjacent. You need to memorize which one is which, because in your calculator it just says the button. It doesn't say which sides you need to put in. So the way most people remember this is so, ka, toa. Okay? So you got sine, let's do it this way. You got sine, cosine, tangent. Those are pretty easy to remember. They're usually in that order on your calculator. You have access to your calculator. Then you got o, a, oa. So basically, that's taking the sides that make sense, sine, opposite over hypotenuse, okay? OH, cos, adjacent over hypotenuse, and then tan, opposite over adjacent. So we're going to go over more examples of how to actually calculate this next time, but it's basically setting this up for now and labeling the triangle properly is what you need to be able to do.